My parents were waiting for me as soon as I entered the courtroom. Their chilly, piercing smiles were the same ones that used to terrify me as a child. Before a word was said, they appeared certain that they had won. How come they wouldn't be? I was just the daughter they had abandoned 20 years before, but to the outside world, they were the brilliant writers from television, loved, respected, and untouchable. However, the game's regulations had altered. The only person who had ever really cared for me, my grandfather, had died and left me all of his billion-dollar wealth. I was being dragged to court to reclaim it by the same individuals who had left me at his door. My heart was pounding so loudly that it appeared to reverberate off the marble walls as I stood in front of the judge. He raised his eyes and studied me intently. "Wait, you're her!" he exclaimed, his voice trembling in shock as a flash of recognition appeared on his face. The ensuing hush was overwhelming. The truth that my parents had been hiding for years started to come to light, shattering their polished assurance. The day they disappeared from my life, I was just 5 years old. That afternoon, the Santa Barbara heat was fierce and unrelenting, searing everything but my hollow chill. The perfume of lilac clung to my mother, Victoria, as she crouched in front of me, her white summer dress flapping. "Be kind to your grandfather," she responded, her false smile quivering at the edges. "All right, sweetheart." Her eyelids were excessively dry, and her lipstick appeared too vivid. Charles, my father, was leaning against the automobile and pounding the hood with his fingers. "Come on, Vic. I'm going to miss the flight." "Flight?" I grasped her dress with my tiny hand and requested, "Where are you heading? May I come?" She froze for a heartbeat. "Darling, it's only a short trip. I'll be back shortly." But I could hear the fracture in her voice even as a young child. She didn't give me a hug. Rather, she leaned in close enough to kiss the air next to my face as her earrings touched my cheek. Like a ticking clock, her shoes clicked away. Their silver convertible disappeared under the iron gates as the car door banged and the tires crunched on gravel. I pursued it until my legs gave out and my breath broke in my chest. The air was heavy with the stench of petrol and dust. Only the wind and distant seagulls responded when I cried out to them. Then a firm, gentle, and familiar hand settled on my shoulder. Grandpa Henry knelt next to me, his quiet but firm presence. He never spoke hurriedly. His words were always meaningful. He swept the dirt from my knees with kind gray eyes. "My dear, they have no idea what they've lost," he muttered, his voice quivering with love and grief. He hesitated, raising my chin until our gazes locked. He whispered, "You'll never be unwanted again," and then carried me back towards the mansion while holding me in his arms as if I were weightless. His heartbeat calmed the terror that was still coursing through me as I laid my head on his shoulder. For the first time during the day, I felt secure. Later that evening, as he stood by the stove preparing his own cocoa, I sat in the large kitchen, swinging my legs above the tiled floor. "Just him, no staff, no formality?" he asked with a little smile. "Extra marshmallows, right?" With tears clouding my vision, I nodded. The home felt too big and motionless when he put me to bed. The grandfather clock's steady, deliberate ticking sounded like the footsteps of individuals who will never come back. "Will they come back?" I muttered. After a moment of hesitation, he stroked a soft hand through my hair. "Some doors," my dear Emma used to say, "ought to stay closed. You'll never have to chase love again," he said softly before turning off the lamp. "It now resides here." I held onto his hand in the low light, believing everything he said. I stopped waiting for my parents that night and began to feel like I belonged to someone who actually stayed. Grandpa Henry's life was nothing like the billionaire films. His mansion stood like a solitary sentinel above Santa Barbara's cliffs, overlooking the Pacific. However, there were no maids or opulent galas running around inside. The house had a precise, serene, and meaningful rhythm. His soft knock woke me every morning at 6. "Emma, get up." He would remind me that the world doesn't wait for people who stay. I would shuffle over to the kitchen, where he was already sitting with the morning paper spread out and a cup of black coffee. "Read this," he would say while tapping a headline. "Then tell me what they're not telling us." I didn't really understand at first. A young child attempting to complete her breakfast. But his message became clear with time. Just because something is printed doesn't mean you should believe it. He claimed that the truth is hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered by those who have the courage to look for it. He founded Whitmore Industries, a massive transportation and logistics network that connected countries. But ethics was always more important to him than money. He would frequently compare money to salt water. You get thirstier the more you drink. Thus, make sure your desires are worthwhile. I saw the globe bend in his direction. Politicians are excited to shake his hand. Attorneys looking to him for advice. Workers are motivated to deliver. His power was modest but unassailable, and he ruled with justice rather than brutality. He eventually took me to his office when I was 10. As the light faded, the downtown glass towers glowed like the future he was preparing me to inherit. Everyone in the building greeted me with cautious curiosity and him with calm reverence. "This is my granddaughter," he declared with a tone of pride. "She'll ask more difficult questions than any of you one day." His hand lightly touched my shoulder, and I gave him a shy yet confident smile. He wasn't getting me ready to take over. He was training me to look past outward manifestations to find the reality. We would travel to the community center he had constructed every weekend. Grandpa spent hours kneeling next to kids learning to read or teaching teenagers how to handle their first savings while other tycoons gave cash and posed for pictures. He frequently muttered, "If you use it only to stand above others, then power means nothing." My parents' radiant features appeared on a television screen once more when I turned 16. They were promoting a new reality program about redemption, while laughing on the red carpet in Los Angeles. My knuckles whitened as my hands clenched around the remote. With his eyes following the wavering image, Grandpa gently entered. "Are you missing them?" he inquired. My lips quivered as I spoke the truth, but it was softer. "No more." He nodded slowly. "Excellent. It's like staring at closed doors when you miss people who have departed. The ones that are still open will be missed." He gave me a small worn journal that was bound in brown leather that evening. He said, "For your truth, the world will attempt to alter it at some point. Keep them from doing so." At the time, I had no notion that this work would serve as my defense, the proof that would eventually shield me from my parents' attempts to have me removed in court. The world was shaky the morning he died. The sea beneath the cliffs was excessively placid, and the air was motionless. I discovered him in his study, with his spectacles still on top of an open page and his head lowered over his desk. "Truth in the wrong hands turns to poison," was the last line he had penned. First, I didn't cry. Staring at the man who had filled every vacuum in my life, I stood still. Then the intense, unrelenting anguish surfaced. The city's elite, including judges, magnates, and even former presidents, flocked to his funeral in order to pay tribute to Henry Whitmore, the man who established an empire based on morality. But none of that was what I desired. Before I saw them, all I wanted was one more hour with him, one more of his lessons, and one more hot cup of cocoa on a wet night. With their sleek black outfits and fashionable sunglasses covering their faces, my parents stood close to the front. Victoria, my mother, used a lace handkerchief to dab at her eyes, her tears as fake as her smile. Charles, my father, appeared disinterested and irritated, as if the service was preventing him from pursuing greater opportunities. For the first time in 22 years, they approached me after the ceremony. "Emma," my mother said, cocking her head, "you've grown so much." I stepped back and fixed my steady look on her painted face. "You recalled my name." She forced a smile back after it wavered for a moment. "We're family," she remarked casually. "We ought to get back in touch." "Family." I said it again. The word has a bitter taste. "You abandoned me with him as if I were too much luggage to handle." Charles's jaw tightened and his expression deepened. "You've always had a flair for the dramatic." Before I could respond, Mr. Samuel Briggs, Henry's lawyer, showed up in the doorway and told everyone to assemble in the estate office so the will could be read. As the guests filed inside, a quiet murmur spread among them. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. After clearing his throat, Samuel started reading. Emma Whitmore, the late Judge Henry Whitmore's granddaughter, inherits all of his possessions, including the Whitmore home, business assets, and financial interests. There was complete stillness after that. My mum let out a loud gasp. She stumbled. "That's not possible." Charles struck the polished table with his hand. He was elderly. He wasn't thinking clearly. Samuel, however, remained steadfast. Additionally, he wrote a note to his daughter-in-law and son. His tone remained calm as he spoke. It says, "Those who abandon truth for comfort have already surrendered their inheritance." Victoria's mouth quivered. This is not something he can accomplish. We are his offspring. Samuel did not flinch when he met her gaze. You already have all you needed from him. An opportunity to be respectable. You decided to throw it away. My fingers gripped the edge of the table till they ached as I stood still. I witnessed my parents' charm crumbling in front of everyone for the first time, their polish gone. My mother turned to face me as the crowd started to disperse, her voice low and poisonous. "Emma, you'll regret this. He built something that you don't deserve." I stared back at her. "You don't either." The gravel was covered in white petals from the funeral wreaths as the wind blew through the gates outside. I realized then that pain and avarice frequently coexisted, and I could just hear Grandpa's voice in the wind's whisper. "Emma, take a proud stance. The truth always finds its way back." A week later, all started over when a huge white envelope arrived at my door. There was no sender, just my name, Emma Whitmore, in bold, distinctive handwriting. Expecting sympathy cards, I tore it open. Rather, the heading "Notice of Civil Action" caught my attention. The word struck like a dagger beneath it. Emma Whitmore is accused of excessive influence by Charles and Victoria Whitmore. I was immobile for a few seconds. The papers slid from my grasp because my hands were shaking so much. I was being sued by my own parents, who claimed that I had tricked the only man who had ever shown me affection into giving me everything. The story took off in a matter of hours. By nightfall, the same scandal was featured in every headline. The granddaughter of a billionaire was sued by her parents for a $1.6 billion estate. Outside the gates, paparazzi flocked, their cameras flashing like lightning. Robert Hayes, my lawyer, called early the following morning. Only years of turbulence could impart the trained calm that permeated his voice. "They're going fast, Emma. The Los Angeles County filings. There are still friends of your father." I said, "Of course he does. He was always powerful, but it was never significant." I met Robert at his downtown office later that day. He moved a pile of papers across the desk. "They claim you prevented your grandfather from receiving visits, meddled in his medical treatment, and coerced him into amending his will." I let out a harsh laugh. Restricted access. It wasn't the other way around. He was shielding me from them. Robert let out a slow breath. "I've dealt with unpleasant estate issues before, but this is the first time parents have sued their own daughter." "They're not my parents," I murmured in a scarcely audible whisper. "They are strangers who are genetically connected to me." Even still, I couldn't help but think of Grandpa's last few weeks, the quiet dinners, his tired grin, and the shaking in his hand as he signed letters. Did he anticipate this? Perhaps he abandoned the journal for that reason. Perhaps he anticipated my need for it. 2 days later, a tabloid reporter with flashing cameras pushed forward as I was leaving a coffee. "Did you control your grandfather, Emma? Did you make a threat against him? If loving the man who raised me counts as manipulation, then yes, I'm guilty," I said calmly as I stopped and turned to face the throng. My phone was illuminated by a blocked number by the following morning. "Enjoying your fame?" The sound of my mother's voice was like ice over the phone. "Why are you doing this?" I inquired. "Because you took what's ours," she stated icily. "Our lives were taken by you. We'll take yours now." The cue then died. I spent that evening by myself in the study where my grandfather had previously taught me how to read contracts. Next to the well-known leather diary was his picture. I opened it and traced his fading handwriting with my fingers. "Stand still when the truth is put to the test. Allow them to attack. All they will do is harm themselves." I took a deep breath and closed the book. Though the terror persisted, something more powerful started to emerge beneath it. Decide. They picked the wrong Whitmore if they wanted a fight. The sky was bruised and heavy, with clouds hanging low over Los Angeles when the first hearing took place. Hungry for blood, reporters flocked to the courthouse steps. I was done running, but I had no idea whose reputation would be destroyed that day, mine or theirs. There was a subtle smell of polished wood and anxiety throughout the courtroom. Perfectly positioned for the flashing cameras, my parents were seated at the plaintiff's table. My father was sharp in a navy suit, and my mother was flawless in a black dress. They didn't appear to be grieving. They appeared to be practiced actors in the middle of a scene, exacting revenge on the audience. The room was filled with murmuring when I walked in. "That's her, the granddaughter," a whisperer said. My palms trembled inside, but my heels struck the marble with a purposeful rhythm. Robert's voice was calm and low as he leaned towards me. "Emma, keep your cool. Let the facts speak for themselves." Judge Marcus Nolan, a man with silver hair and unblinking eyes, sat at the bench. Even before he spoke, the room was dominated by his presence. A peculiar flash of familiarity appeared on his face when we locked eyes. Startled, perhaps disbelieving. Slowly, he removed his glasses. "Miss Whitmore," he said in a surprisingly soft voice. "Step forward, please." As I got closer, my gut nodded. There was silence in the gallery. After observing me for a few long moments, he said something that seemed almost private. "You're Henry Whitmore's granddaughter." "Yes, Your Honor." He gave a slight nod. Then his countenance changed. "Respect, perhaps." "I clerked for your grandfather once," he said. "Listen carefully if my granddaughter ever appears in your court," he informed me. "She'll be being honest." The audience erupted in gasps. I could hear my father's tense jaw clicking and my mother's mask cracking behind me. Judge Nolan stood up straight. "Go ahead," he urged, his composed voice now tinged with conviction, the kind that alerted everyone to the fact that integrity was still important in this situation. Elliot Graves, their attorney, stood up with practiced assurance. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "this young woman forced her old grandfather to amend his will, secluded him, and meddled in his medical care. Our goal is to demonstrate intentional fraud." Robert was unfazed. "We look forward to refuting every falsehood, Your Honor." Graves turned, grinning sharply. For someone who is accused of stealing $1 billion, she appears extremely calm. I addressed his gaze with a steady, clear voice. "Mr. Graves, composure does not equate to guilt. It is trust in the truth." The courtroom was filled with a quiet murmur of appreciation, the sound of an audience starting to change their loyalty. Judge Nolan's mouth quirked as well. A smile, but not quite. My parents' team threw everything they had once the testimony started. Emails that have been warped, snippets of previous letters that have been taken out of context, and cut passages from staff reports. Robert confronted them each time with impeccable documentation, accurate timings, and witnesses who consistently upheld my grandfather's moral principles. However, my mother's testimony was the cruelest blow. Every tear was timed properly, and her shaky voice was exquisite. She pressed a button and stated, "We just wanted to get back in touch with our daughter," gently applied tissue on her cheek. Emma, however, shoved us aside. She disconnected us from Dad. All we wanted to do was preserve his legacy. Her performance was flawless, and her testimony was full of sympathy. However, Grandpa's caution was the only sound I could hear in my head. When truth is misused, it can become poison. Then it dawned on me. Only when you allow poison to enter can it cause harm. And I had no intention of doing so. The trial began to feel more like a fight on the second day. Elliot Graves, their lawyer, walked around the floor as if it were a stage, brandishing documents and acting indignant for the cameras. However, I had not arrived to take action. I would come to complete what they had begun. Calm as ever, Robert gently stood up. "Your Honor," he answered calmly. "New evidence, medical evaluations, witness testimony, and personal correspondence from the late Judge Whitmore are all submitted by the defense. There is one paper in particular that merits consideration." My mother's back stiffened at the word correspondence. She was already aware. Judge Nolan motioned for him to go on. Robert turned to face me after passing over a hefty folder. "Please take the stand, Miss Whitmore." As I moved across the room, my heart pounded, each step resonating in the quiet. It hurt my chest to face the two individuals who had both created and betrayed me, even though I had practiced this moment innumerable times. Robert put a letter underneath the camera for evidence. The screen was covered with my grandfather's recognizable handwriting, which was steady, graceful, and indisputable. It said, "You were never my duty, to my beloved Emma. I choose you. Never confront people who have abandoned you with hatred if you stand up to them. Let the truth stand up for you. It will always do so." The room became completely silent. The painted calm of my mother started to erode. My dad's mouth was clenched as he gazed down. Robert's voice didn't waver. Over the course of 10 years, Judge Whitmore's clear-headedness, love, and deliberate choice to give his estate to his granddaughter were all affirmed in these letters. Elliot Graves leaped to his feet. "Your Honor, I object. These letters are little more than theatrical displays of emotion. They provide no meaningful legal evidence." Judge Nolan declared, "Overruled," in a stern and decisive tone. "The deedant's intent is exactly what this court is here to determine. Continue, Mr. Hayes." My indication was a modest nod from Robert. I pulled the leather journal that Grandpa had given me for my 16th birthday out of my luggage. The spine was shattered, the edges were torn, and years of turning had softened every page. I whispered that this was my grandfather's private journal. He wrote in it every night until the week he died. I steadied my voice as I turned to the last entry. The penmanship was firm, but the ink had faded a little. "Appearances are everything to my son and his spouse. My granddaughter is a truth seeker. She must own the estate as a safeguard rather than as a prize. Where I can no longer carry my conscience, she does." The ensuing silence was almost divine. Then my mother lost her cool. She said he was sick, and jumped out of her chair. He had no idea what he was saying. She played tricks on him. With a piercing crack, the gavel descended. "Mrs. Whitmore, sit down," Judge Nolan commanded. Her words vanished into thin air as they bounced off the wooden walls. I turned to face the woman who gave me life but never showed me affection, and I whispered to her, "Mother, no one took advantage of him. At last he recognized you for who you truly are." I felt the truth settle like armor inside of me for the first time in years. I was no longer their pawn. I was the granddaughter of Henry Whitmore. Time itself seemed to crawl by the third day. Every whisper, every shifting chair, every cough reverberated like thunder. With my gaze ahead and my fingers clenched together, I sat at the defense table. My parents' trained assurance crumbled as they urgently spoke to their lawyer across the aisle. The door then opened. Judge Nolan came in, his visage blank as his robe swept. The room fell silent in an instant. He sat down, straightened the papers in front of him, and looked at me. For a split second, I thought I saw a flash of pride in his eyes. "This court has reviewed all of the testimony, records, and correspondence of the late Judge Henry Whitmore," he said in a composed but firm tone. "What stands before me is not evidence of coercion, but of greed, misplaced and deliberate." There was a slight commotion in the gallery. My dad's mouth tightened. There was a noticeable trembling in my mother's fingers. Judge Nolan went on to say that the plaintiffs had not demonstrated undue influence. On the contrary, the record demonstrates the deceased's deliberate judgment, mental stability, and obvious intent. He hesitated, allowing his words to linger in the heir's mind. As a result, the court completely rejects the plaintiff's claims. Judge Whitmore's will is upheld. Miss Emma Whitmore is the owner of the estate. The courtroom was completely silent for a single suspended heartbeat. The surge then arrived. Reporters gasping for sound bits, cameras flashing, pens scratching. I stayed put. Everything else was drowned out by the thunderous sound of my heartbeat. Judge Nolan looked at my parents. "Justice does not belong to blood," he remarked calmly. "It is a part of reality." The words were like a blow. My father's shoulders collapsed under an unseen weight as he dropped into his chair. My mother's mouth were open, but she was unable to speak as she gazed vacantly at the ground. The final crack of the gavel sounded like the concluding salvo in a protracted fight. My legs shook as I stood up. Robert put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "It's over," he whispered. "You did it." But winning didn't taste like victory. The silence that follows a storm while the smoke is still heavy was like ash. My mother's hand rushed out and grabbed my wrist as I turned to walk away. Her fingernails dug into my flesh. "Do you believe that this makes you superior to us?" She spat. "Emma, you'll regret this. Like him, you'll wind up alone." I spoke steadily while staring directly at her. Being by myself is preferable to being hollow. I freed myself. The courtroom stairs were bathed in intense, blinding sunlight outside that had a purifying effect. With microphones thrust in my direction and voices blending together in a cacophonous din, the press rushed forward. "How does winning feel? How are you going to spend the money?" I stopped. The wind from the Pacific was pulling at my hair halfway down the stairs. It wasn't about money, I said. Enough to be heard by every camera. It has to do with reality. The decision papers were lying next to me as I sat in the study under Grandpa's portrait that evening. You were correct, Grandpa, I muttered into the quiet. It's true that truth has long arms. And it returned today at last. After the decision, weeks passed, yet tranquility was difficult to achieve. The media hysteria subsided. The headlines changed. But the silence that ensued seemed more intense than before. The land, the cliffside mansion, the businesses, and the wealth were all legally mine. But without him, it all seemed meaningless. The house didn't feel like a house, but rather a monument. I could really hear his voice woven into the silence as I strolled through its lengthy hallways at night, past oil paintings and reverberating floorboards. If you are unable to live with your conscience, power is meaningless. I slept fearlessly for the first time, however, sadly. Then my phone called one evening as the sun painted the horizon in a rich red light as it seeped into the Pacific. On the screen, a strange number gleamed. I was hesitant to respond. Hi there. There was a pause, followed by a shaky, frail voice. It was my father, Emma, and I briefly lost my air. The same man who had roared charges throughout a courtroom now spoke in a voice that was hardly audible above a whisper, brittle, on the verge of disintegrating. I read the journal, he added, pausing. The entries of your grandfather. I couldn't stop reading, even though I didn't want to believe them. He gasped for air. Long before the will was written, he wrote, I lost my way and ceased to be his son. I shut my eyes. He also said, it's never too late to do what's right, I muttered. There was a pause, followed by a shaky breath. I needed you to know, Emma, even if I don't deserve forgiveness. I apologize for everything, for abandoning you, for placing the blame on you, and for turning into the father he foresaw. His words lingered there, brittle, genuine, and intolerably human. For a few long seconds, neither of us said anything. I looked out the window at the garden that Grandpa had planted for Grandma all those years ago. The calm felt serene for the first time in a long time as the air rustled through the roses. I muttered, I don't know if I can forgive you, at last. But I know Grandpa would have wanted me to try. He took a trembling breath. I'll accept that. I don't deserve it. He added quietly before the line died. The way you never give up makes me think of him. I remained there, gazing at the horizon after the call ended. Once more, the world had become quiet, but this time it was tranquilly and healing rather than grief. Feeling the soft grass underfoot, I went outside barefoot. The estate was bathed in warm, golden light as the sun sank beneath the water. I held Grandpa's journal in my hands. I turned to the last page and read the words that had outlived him. True justice is found in the hearts of those who continue to believe in it, not in courtrooms. At last, the tears came slow and gentle. I said, I think, Grandpa. I will always do so. And I could just hear his response in the quiet of the evening breeze. Peaceful, proud, and gentle. My girl, I'll be able to sleep at last. I was struck with a peaceful clarity as the ocean wind blew through the roses. The true legacy he had left behind was forgiveness, even if justice had long since been achieved.